I mean, as we see in the Daily article, and as we can imagine in other contexts, like it's not the only sort of unit. Social Security represents a sort of mediation of your long-term retirement needs through a national pool, right? But in terms of like household income and how much food you have, how many, what kind of conditions you live in, that unit of the household is not just a metaphor. It's actually the level at which your well-being is determined. Correct?
Yeah, I was just bringing up a reason why like, a lot of families would have a lot of children.
Oh, I see. I see. Yes, I mean there are. It can go both ways in a sense, right? Your children can be a source of security long-term, can be a source of income shorter-term, or they can be an expense that you have to bear by making wages of your own and then spending them to support them. Did you have something? Yeah. Okay. There's also at this point a lot depends on a larger household. If it extends to grandparents and that beyond the nuclear family, can help absorb some of the costs, can provide childcare that you might otherwise have to pay for or miss work to provide yourselves, that kind of thing. Yeah. Okay. So. Okay. In general, the correlations suggest that higher levels of education correlate with lower rates of fertility. And there are a variety of reasons, and we've touched on some of them already, why that might be the case. If you yourself are very educated and you aspire that your children will also be very educated, that means you're going to have to shoulder some serious costs to provide that education, and that might give you an incentive not to have as many kids. You don't feel like you can afford more kids. And you're right, there are also very educated people who have lots of kids, but those are, so to speak, the outliers statistically relative to the pattern at larger scales. You're right. Right. You're pointing out that there are other factors that can intervene other than what we might consider formal education, such as religious beliefs, that can alter the behavior against the grain, so to speak, of these larger patterns. And that's certainly true. Okay. Okay. It's a good question. What do people really think of their children as an investment? And on the one hand, clearly many people do, or at least once they have them, they actively cultivate this notion that they're making investments in their children. On the other hand, it's not clear that we really need to ask whether they think of it that way. If you went to a peasant village in central Russia in 1800 and you asked them, are your children an investment? That question itself might seem kind of odd to them. They might say no, but there's plenty of social scientific research to suggest that in fact how many children you were able to raise had a significant impact on how prosperous you were in that context, because larger families could essentially grow more food. Right? So I want to just make sure we've wrapped up a couple of these things here. There are a couple other things still to say about this Economist article. And actually tying this back again to Libbey-Bachie, with the title of that chapter from Libbey-Bachie, right? From disorder to order, or something like that, right? The larger framework, and he starts with that the sort of metaphor or the analogy of the steam engine that James Watt invented, and how it was much more efficient than the steam engines that preceded it. And this allowed for, in many ways, triggered the Industrial Revolution by enabling much more efficient use of coal to generate work and with less waste. And he uses this analogy to suggest that this is sort of a way of thinking about what's happened in the demographic transition. That before the transition, you have a lot of waste, so to speak. You have many babies being born, but short life expectancy, high levels of infant mortality. The average woman might have 5 or 6 children in her lifetime and only see 2 of them live through to adulthood, and thereby achieving replacement in terms of demographic turnover, but at the expense of a lot of loss of life. And at the end of the demographic transition, the implication is we've achieved some kind of efficiency and order in which infant mortality is much lower, is almost negligible, life expectancies are much longer, and the number of births is much smaller, and yet you can still achieve replacement or even a positive rate of growth overall. And this, it fits together sort of with this idea that people are becoming more efficient or economical, rational in their decisions about fertility. And he even goes so far as to suggest that long life expectancy is kind of a necessary condition for the kinds of investments, long-term investments, that we think of as characteristic of an efficient society, right? You wouldn't spend 22 years of your life getting educated. You wouldn't devote 22 years of your children's life to education if life expectancy was 25, right? It wouldn't make as much sense. With life expectancies of 60, 70, 75 years, it makes a whole lot of sense to invest in an education that will enable you to do things over the following 40 or 50 years that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do. Let's come back to the Malthus point here in The Economist. In many ways, The Economist agrees with the comment from the back here that this does not necessarily set aside at least the environmental issues raised by population, right? That it's true that there are still implications of having 9 billion people on the Earth and the resources those people need, and that to that extent, it's not like The Economist agrees. We can't just sort of raise our hands and celebrate and pretend that there's nothing wrong here. The point they're trying to drive home is declining fertility is both symptomatic of and contributes to economic growth and prosperity, which they believe is good in general, and the issue of whether there are enough resources for all these people or how to sustain those resources and find more sustainable ways of organizing the economy is a separate issue, essentially. Did you have something? Yeah. Considering that, is there a way to achieve sustainable growth? That is an excellent question, and it's precisely the question that we're going to look at starting next week. We're going to look at a variety of more recent frameworks that have been offered in the effort to figure out whether economic growth can be sustainable or not. It sounds like an oxymoron. Yes. And in fact, that is the back cover of the Herman Daly book. Here's one. The Wall Street Journal says, in Beyond Growth, Daly derides the concept of sustainable growth as an oxymoron. Okay. What else? Okay. In principle, there are 3 ways of limiting human environmental impacts through population policy, technology, and governance. The first of those does not offer much scope. Population growth is already slowing almost as fast as it naturally could. Easier access to family planning, especially in Africa, could probably lower its expected peak from around 9 billion to perhaps 8.5 billion. Only Chinese-style coercion would bring it down much below that, and forcing poor people to have fewer children than they want because the rich consume too many of the world's resources would be immoral. If population policy can do little more to alleviate environmental damage, then the human race will have to rely on technology and governance to shift the world's economy towards cleaner growth. Okay. Let's take our 5-minute break now. Okay. Okay, let's talk for a moment about Daly. Anybody know about Herman Daly? Anybody know anything about him? No? He's quite famous as an economist. He's strongly associated with the subfields of environmental economics in particular, ecological economics, according to some definitions. He worked for the World Bank for a long time, although he doesn't any longer. So he was very closely involved for a long time with World Bank development policy and questions of how the World Bank should spend its money, invest in the development of the third world, the so-called third world. And this put him directly in the path of a lot of big projects with serious environmental implications, damages, big dam building projects, that kind of thing. And he, in many ways, was a sort of iconoclast. On the one hand, he on one hand, he was right there in the middle of the beast, so to speak, the big development bank. On the other hand, he also did try to point out the ways in which environmental damages and other kinds of social damages from these projects might undermine their putative purpose of development as prosperity, that kind of thing. So what does he say in this article about northeastern Brazil? Anyone want to start by offering some thoughts about northeastern Brazil? What's the context he's writing in? What is he pointing out? Why is his attention drawn to northeastern Brazil? These discussions are hard. Come on, yeah. Okay, he says this is probably the greatest disparity in fertility rates by class ever found, perhaps in all of history. He certainly suggests, he makes a case that it's the greatest disparity in the present day world. And what is this disparity, approximately? And he points out that he emphasizes this is not just between the sort of richest few and the poorest few. This is actually between the top 20% of the population in terms of income and everybody else, the remaining 80%. How big is the disparity by his calculations? Yeah. More than 100%. Oh, yeah, initially, in his earlier efforts, he's sort of following up on an earlier study. In his earlier study, he estimated that the difference was roughly 8 to 4. 8 children per woman among the poor, 4 among the better off. He then has some more recent data and sort of evaluates things again and decides that, in fact, it was probably more than that. That the fertility rate among the wealthy was probably lower, the fertility rate among the poor was probably slightly higher, and that the difference was in the ballpark of 7 children. So 9 versus 2. Why is this important, in his view? Yeah. Okay, he sees this disparity in fertility as reinforcing the poverty of the lower 80% of society in northeastern Brazil. And I mean, it's worth stressing that Brazil is, and has been for a long time, one of the most unequal countries in the world in terms of the distribution of wealth. It is actually significantly more unequal than the United States, which is saying something. And northeastern Brazil is an extreme even within Brazil in terms of the disparity between the rich and the poor. So his point is that this difference in fertility is perpetuating and contributing to this inequality in a variety of ways. What are some of the ways he describes? There's some obvious ones, and then there's some less obvious or indirect ones. Is this a situation in which having more kids means you have more breadwinners and can actually bring in more income as a household? No. It's not that kind of a situation. He does insist that the proper way of thinking about the prosperity of people in Brazil is at the household level. In other words, what's household income per member of the household. So if you have 7 kids, that's a bigger household, but you still only have 2 people making an income, then each person in that household is going to be that much poorer, right? Adding another mouth to feed means everyone's got less to eat. What are some of the other ways in which he says this is a reinforcing dynamic? Yeah. Okay, he points out that in the well-off households, the women are frequently working, and that in the poorer households, it's more likely that the woman is going to have to stay home and look after the kids. And that means less opportunity for income. And he goes on to suggest that the high rate of fertility among the poor is producing an abundance, a superabundance of cheap labor. It's ensuring an ongoing supply of cheap labor, which means that the rich have an even easier time hiring people to look after their kids so that the wife can go work. Yeah?
Does this tie into the recent, Mike Davis's recent research on the informal labor sector, or the beginnings of the informal labor?
Good question. What about informal labor? It's not clear from this piece whether Daly has got the data to try to think about the informal labor sector or not. And he's working in units of minimum wage, right? And that implies that there is some kind of minimum wage, and that further might imply that the data he's using are official data from official jobs. But he doesn't clarify that, and I kind of doubt that it would only be official data from official jobs, just because chances are that a lot of these people, he describes people who are making less than minimum wage, which in turn implies that there are people who are working for less than minimum wage, which has got to be informal to some degree, right? So I don't know that it anticipates Davis's concern about the informal sector. It might or might not incorporate some of those phenomena. What's Daly trying to do overall? I mean, we tend to think of Malthus and Marx as incompatible, right? He acknowledges that in general, people think of these as incompatible. And he has a very interesting description of why this disparity in fertility is kind of a taboo subject. He says it is a taboo subject, at least within Brazil, even among economists and people interested in development. It's something that's somehow difficult for people to talk about. The general tenor of things politically in Brazil at the time, and he's talking about maybe the 1960s and then into the 1970s, was, he says, pro-natalist across the board. What are some of the reasons for that, he says? He says the Marxists were pro-natalist. The bourgeoisie were pro-natalist. Nobody seemed to speak up in favor of trying to reduce fertility. Anybody remember what the array of political factors encouraging high fertility were? Yeah. The rich need cheap labor. The Marxists are looking for foot soldiers, proletariat foot soldiers who will force through the revolution. Continuing to have a large labor supply means low wages, which means immiseration, which ought to mean an uprising. Who else is interested in not allowing there to be birth control? The Catholic Church is very powerful in Brazil, and the Catholic Church has never been in favor of birth control. Who else? What's the other major player in Brazilian politics at this time? The military regime. This is a period of military dictatorship, and the military regime was in favor of more Brazilians and argued that the country was overflowing with natural resources and actually was short of enough people to populate, utilize, and defend the country. And for them, having more people meant that they could pursue more settlement schemes for the Amazon, for instance, right? They were actively encouraging development in the Amazon, and they wanted people to go live there, people other than the indigenous people who already did live there. So at the end of the day, what's his argument? He seems to be saying, no, we can do Malthus and Marx together. How? What's his Marxist take on fertility and the importance of birth control? How do you express birth control in Marxist terminology? Anybody have the reading with them? Anybody do the reading? Yeah. No, I'm talking. Go ahead. Well, he was talking about the Brazilian left of the time, but yes. Well, no, I'm talking about what does Daly do in his effort to sort of retool Marxist categories to make sense of this issue of fertility in Brazil. Yeah, or are you not raising your hand? Okay. He recasts it as a question of control of the means of reproduction, right? He suggests that the wealthy in Brazil have got access to birth control. They can afford it. They know where to find it. They know how to use it and use it safely. And they are using it to control the number of kids that they have. And they have rates of fertility in the ballpark of 2 to 3, right? By the end of the period of time he's discussing. So this is control of the means of reproduction. He says what we need is to allow the rest of society, the working class, the poor, to have control of the means of reproduction too. And a Marxist might say, no, what they need is control of the means of production. And Daly is sidestepping that, I think, and more or less saying, well, regardless of what you think about the means of production,